Okay, we're just trying to make sure everything's set up here. Hey, everybody. This is Ervin with AquaLocate live from Texas, our Tuesday live that we try to do every week. We've maybe missed 1 week since we started this about a month and a half or so ago. Um, One thing I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions for us, if you need any help, please go ahead and post it in the chat here. If you see this video somewhere else, like on Facebook or somewhere, feel free to message us or comment on those videos, and we'll try to get to those questions or discuss with you what you might want to discuss on those other places. But go ahead and join us now if you'd like to. We'd love to talk to you and answer your questions if you have any. Again, my name's Ervin, and for a little over 25 years, we've been helping people all over the world with their existing well water problems or find new places to drill their next well. What I'm going to talk about today is the 10 basic steps. Now, I don't know if I'll get through all of these. I'll probably elaborate on some more than we cover in the document we send to people, but there's kind of 10 basic steps to the drilling process. And I don't think we can talk about this enough because a lot of people aren't familiar with it. And even though there's 10 steps, I'm going to add one. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to add one real quick. So if you haven't fallen in love with a piece of property yet, you haven't committed to buying it, or you're still kind of toying with the idea of buying a specific piece of property, I would strongly encourage you to do some of your own research. If you don't know how to do it and you need some help with it, we would love to help you. But do research, try to find out as much as you can about, especially the groundwater situation on that property. Don't just take somebody's word for it when it comes to verbal information. Don't take the real estate agent's word for it or the neighbor's word for it. Sometimes neighbors will say, well, yeah, we got lots of water, but that person doesn't use very much water. So lots of water is relative to that person. So I've worked with a lot of people over the years that are already in love with a piece of property and end up finding out that it's going to be a difficult place to find water for any number of reasons, whether it's a weak aquifer or bad drilling practices or a combination of those. So if you haven't purchased property yet or fall in love with it and purchase it, do some research, call us, we'll do some research. I'm sure that you could find some help on the subject, but we'd love to help you. We'll send out these list of 10 basic steps of the drilling process, so you're educated to a degree on it. It'll help you have a conversation with a driller. Hopefully, it'll generate some questions for you as you approach the idea of buying property. Now, if you already have the property and you got to drill a well, or you have to drill another well, you have to solve a water issue. Then these steps they start at number one, and we'll just go over these one at a time. So first of all, the first step, of course, is drilling, identifying a drilling location. Most people, I think, would prefer to have their drilling location near their home or wherever they're going to use the water. That would be ideal, but water isn't always, that may or may not be the best place for it. So sometimes in some areas, the aquifers are either minor, they're small, unnamed or named, but smaller, and you may need some exploration services. We can help you with that. But things you want to think about: proximity to undrillable areas. There are certain states, they have pretty strict regulations on, say, wetlands and things like that. So you want to make sure that you haven't identified a drill location personally that you can't drill a well, or proximity to a septic system. You can't drill within a certain distance of a septic system, septic tanks or drain field. I think the reason is obvious, but you got to be careful with that. Also, a lot of states have required setbacks. You have to be so many feet away from, say, the property line or a county road or a city street. And you have to consider that as you're doing it. If you have a really small piece of property, it may mean that you have a very limited area where you can drill. And we've had calls from people over the years that needed a well. They didn't have a choice. They had to drill because there was no water, like city water, rural water for them. And they contacted us, and they had like an acre, but on that acre was a house and an outbuilding, and they had setbacks from the property line and setbacks from a septic system. So they end up with this very, very small area that they can drill. And in those cases, to be honest with you, you have no choice to drill. Having exploration done is kind of, It might prepare you for some bad news, hopefully good news, but it might prepare you bad news, but it might not be very beneficial. And we would talk you through that because we can't put water where there isn't water. We can't make it better. We could certainly help you with the drilling process. That's what these steps are for. But if you have a really small piece of property, you may just have to drill where you have available to drill. If it's a larger piece of property, couple, 2, 3 acres or more, or bigger than that, certainly exploration is a thought process. If you're in an area where the aquifer is really strong and we do the research for you, we're going to tell you that. We're not going to automatically say, hey, yeah, hire us or hire one of our independent contractors of the AquaLocate GF7 to come and tell you where to drill. If it's a no-brainer and the drillers are pretty honest in that area and they're doing a good job and the range of wells are pretty small, you know, the range of depth and the range of yield are fairly tight, then maybe you don't need services. Maybe you just need some advice, some direction like this, the list of 10 basic steps for drilling. And then you can move on and have conversation with the drilling contractor until you find one that's able and willing to do or follow all these steps. So the second step is choosing the best drilling method for your particular aquifer. That one's a bit of a difficult step, very important, but it can be difficult because usually in areas there's one type of drilling system that everybody uses. So in Texas, where I'm at, mostly with it, we're using air rotary. Primarily, they use air rotary with various versions of that type of system because it's generally appropriate for the rock type here and it works well. Other parts of Texas, they mostly use mud rotary because the aquifers tend to be semi-unstable. They can collapse on the borehole can collapse easily. So you use mud rotary, which stabilizes the formation temporarily. But no matter what drilling system they use, it has to be appropriate for the aquifer. And this is, again, a discussion that you can have with your drilling contractor. There's lots of literature on it. There's some books behind me that are really thick. And they talk a lot about what drilling systems are appropriate for what aquifer type. We can do some research and help you understand what aquifer type you have, but we will help you with that. And maybe you can have a conversation with the driller. Really what you want to do or have done is have a drilling system, whatever kind it is, that's selected that's going to do the least amount of damage. It's not about drilling fast. It's not about drilling efficiently for the drilling contractor. It's about you and how you can have less damage caused to the aquifer during the drilling process, because every time a well is drilled through a natural aquifer, the aquifer system immediately around that hole is damaged. And if we can mitigate that damage and we can mitigate the amount of effort that has to be put into developing and fixing that damage after the well is done. So the third step is sizing the borehole. So in a lot of areas, Texas included, the Northwest included, drillers tend to use one size of borehole. So here in Texas, for the most part, they use what they call 7 7/8. So it's the bit size, whatever size the bit is. And but that may or may not be appropriate. In fact, I would argue, just based on experience, that the 8-inch or nearly 8-inch borehole that's drilled by and large here in this part of Texas is not big enough, because it doesn't allow for an annular space, which is the gap between the casing or the liner and the borehole wall. So there's a gap there, and it's called the annular space, and that's that opening, that space, dead space there. What you really want to have is about a 3 to 5 inch annular space between the edge of the pipe, the outside edge of the pipe, and the actual hole itself. And the reason for that is you want to have enough space to fill that gap with either plugging material to plug off unwanted aquifers, or more than one aquifer, you can't commingle them, or to put enough gravel material or filter pack material in there to make sure that you have enough material so that the development process works. So unfortunately, what they do here for the most part is they'll drill an 8-inch well, but they put a 4.5 inch outside diameter pipe, but that only leaves about 1.25 inches, 1.5 inches of annular space. That's not nearly enough for a million reasons. Not a million, a couple, but we could talk more about that. It's a pretty lengthy conversation, but if you don't have enough annular space, and that pipe that they put down in there in a deep well, that pipe's going to flex one direction or another, especially if they don't use centralizers, which we'll talk about in a minute. And if they don't center that pipe on that borehole and it leans in one direction, what you end up with is a really thin space from the pipe and the wall of the borehole, and then a bigger space on the other side, so you don't evenly distribute the material. So a bigger diameter hole will help ensure that there's enough space all the way around to help fill that gap with that filter material. That's one example. Now, if you're in an area where they're using casing or liners, a lot of the country, they call them liners, PVC liners. So they're really thick PVC, like Schedule 80 PVC. And they'll use liners, but they don't do filter pack. Really, honestly, if they're going to use a liner in a borehole, they really should use a filter pack. And they certainly should use centralizers. And the centralizer basically centers that pipe on the borehole. But the reason why you want to use a filter pack is if they're lining it, they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because the material, the native aquifer material, is not very stable. It's stable for a while, but it might fall off and kind of fall down into that gap, that annular space. And if it falls down and fills it up too much, it actually can clog off or plug off some of the permeable areas in the aquifer. So really, if they're putting some sort of casing or lining in there and there's a gap, that gap should be big enough to allow for filter pack and plugging materials so they can isolate the aquifer from the rest of the well, because you don't want to expose the entire borehole to the water. Basically, you want to isolate it. You want to isolate that zone so you're only pumping water from the aquifer itself. So when a screener liner is installed, I mentioned a minute ago, this is step 4. You do want to use centralizers unless that well is super shallow, let's say 100 feet. If the well is only about 100 feet deep, and you may or may not need a centralizer, but generally speaking, if the well's over 100 feet deep and they're putting a casing or a liner in there and they're going to screen it, they're going to set a screen in there, you do want to use centralizers because that helps ensure that that pipe is centered on the borehole. That means there's equal space all the way around. And without a centralizer, again, what I mentioned before is that pipe is really heavy. When you start putting 200-300 feet of PVC pipe, it's even steel pipe, it's going to flex a little bit. When that flex happens inside of a straight wall, it might be touching part of that wall unless you centralize that pipe. Now, if you centralize that casing or that liner, then you can help ensure that the material that you're going to either plug certain areas off with, or you're going to filter pack with, the sand or gravel you use for the filter pack, will be evenly distributed to help it distribute in that borehole. And that helps with the development process. It helps with making sure that you're only getting water from the aquifer itself. If you expose too much of the borehole to the water that sits in that well, what you're going to do is draw some of those unwanted fines and material like clays and silts and things like that into the well casing itself, and then it'll go down to the pump and then get into your house. It causes clogging, fouling, turbidity, which is kind of a cloudy effect that silts and clays will cause with water. If you isolate the aquifer with a screen and with proper plugging after centralizing, you're going to minimize that, and you're going to help actually improve the effectiveness of the development process, which is a step down the line here. So the 6th step is the filter pack material. If you're having a well drill that's open hole, that means that they drill, say 20 feet, put a steel casing in for the environmental seal, and then from there on the hole is open. They don't have to put any casing or liner because the materials, say bedrock, like granite or basalt or things like that, that is really stable and it's not going to clog or cave in on you. Then that is an open hole, and then you don't really need a filter pack material. But we'll use our area in Texas as an example. So in most of Texas, not everywhere, but most of Texas, they're going to put a casing or a liner in that well after they drill the borehole. And when they do that, they're going to leave annular space. And assuming they use a centralizer, that annular space is going to be equal. And they want to use a filter pack material to help both stabilize the native material so it doesn't cave in or slough off or fall down into that gap. But it also helps optimize both the development process and the production process. So in that, not all filter pack material is created equal. A filter pack material, it's easy for me to say, is a even or a uniform size of either coarse sand or gravel of some kind, all the way up to pea gravel, like 1/4 inch. It could be even that big. but it's supposed to match, or it should be ideally match, the native material fairly close. And there's an easy way to do that. You get a sample of the material that they pulled out of the well where the aquifer was. You can send it off to a company that provides that filter pack material, and they'll actually do what they call a sieve analysis. And that sieve analysis will estimate the size of the material in the borehole itself or in the aquifer. And then they can match the filter pack material to that particular aquifer. Now, there's a lot of areas where the sandstone, say, or the sand material that they're getting is pretty uniform. It's relatively the same size. So they may already know what size material should be used, and they may not have to do a sieve analysis if they have enough experience. But I will say, most drilling contractors just select what they always use. So I would strongly recommend that you have a sieve analysis done on your borehole, and they actually buy the material that's specific to your aquifer. And then there's the placement of that filter pack material. So step 7 is placement of filter pack material. Again, a lot of words. It's kind of tongue tying me. So the once you've selected the proper filter pack material, it should only be placed where the screen is, and the screen should only be placed in the aquifer itself. So wherever the permeable zone is. So in our area, the permeable zone starts at around 350, 355 feet, and then it's pretty much done by about 380, 385 feet. So really the screen should be set right there. It shouldn't be set below it, and it shouldn't be set above it. Even if the water rises into the well, you want the screen set in that aquifer. And then that filter pack material should only be a little bit above, maybe 5 to 10 feet above that screen, and then maybe 5 feet below. The reason for the distance above is that filter pack material will settle a little bit over time, and you want to have enough filter pack material that's above the screen. You don't want any kind of plugging medium in the screen. So you want enough filter pack material to cover just above and just below that screen. Now, you don't want any more than that. You don't want a whole bunch of filter pack material. Again, my experience here in our area is that what the drillers will do, because maybe it's because of simplicity, we'll just go with that, they'll actually start filling from the bottom up. They'll fill with their filter pack material. Usually it's pea gravel here for some reason. And they'll fill it up until they think they're above the aquifer, well above the aquifer that they're trying to get water from, but still hopefully below any other aquifer or water source. That's not really a good idea, because you're exposing too much of that borehole to material that doesn't produce water. And if you do that, you're going to get fine material into your well, and you don't want that. You don't want that fine material in the well, because it causes clogging, and it causes filtration issues and any number of things. So again, ideally, you want your filter pack material only in the path of the screen that you set in the aquifer, and then just above and just below it. And then beyond that, beyond the filter pack, there should be a plug of some kind. So on the bottom of the well, maybe they drilled 20 feet deeper than the aquifer. They probably want to plug off the bottom 10 feet or so. And then they put filter pack material just below the screen, up through the screen, and just about 10 feet above the screen. It's not that much material. And then once they get above the screen, then they're going to set the plug material above that, so they can seal the upper area of the borehole away from that where you want the water coming from. So again, everything above and below should be plugged off. That's step number 8. You don't want to expose too much of the borehole wall to water, because if you do, again, you're going to get contamination. There might be unwanted low production zones above there, and they might not have good quality water. Again, our area, using our area as an example, there's an upper aquifer. You're not legally allowed to commingle those. You're not supposed to. And here the problem is that upper aquifer's got it has very poor quality water. So if they don't seal it off correctly, it's going to contaminate the aquifer that's deeper, that's a much better quality aquifer. So these steps, by the way, we send them to everybody. You can go to website AquaLocate.com, and you can get these 10 steps. It's based on a book I wrote on this topic, so you can get a copy of the book from our website. We'll put a link in this live stream, or at the end of it, it'll be there. And the book covers it in detail. I would recommend it. So step number 9, I can't believe I've gotten to step number 9. I talk really fast. If I'm talking too fast, please yell at me. It's cool. You could say so. So step number nine is well development. Now, if they do everything right, they centralize the pipe, they drill through the aquifer, they put a proper screen in the path of the aquifer only, and then they filter pack the aquifer only above, just above and below the screen, and then they seal the balance of it off with some sort of plugging material, usually cement or bentonite, and everything's ready to go. Then they can aggressively develop the well. Now, well development often takes 8 hours or more. If your driller says, "Oh, we jet the well, but they only do it for 30 minutes," that's not well development. It doesn't undo anything. It doesn't fix anything. Yes, you can use air, the same air they use to drill the well, you can use it to develop the well, but it has to be done differently than just blowing air in the well for 30 minutes. That's not well development. You could trust me on this. There's lots of literature out there. There's links we provided in other videos that you can go to that come from literature from the industry themselves that talk about proper well development. So proper well development includes surge blocks, bailing. Bailing actually does a really good job if it's done right and done long enough. Or jetting tools. There's specialized jetting tools that helps develop the aquifer. But again, they can focus their energy right on the screen. If they put that screen in exactly the right spot, then they only have to develop maybe a 30 or 40 or 50-foot area, and they put all their energy in there. And what it does is it helps breathe life back in the aquifer. If they don't develop the well, then anything they tell you about yield is not accurate. It doesn't matter how they do it. It's not accurate. Anything they tell you about the static level is not accurate if they have not developed the well for about 8 hours or more. Sometimes it takes a lot longer than that, but probably at least about 8 hours to clean up all that cutting material they pushed back into the aquifer and clogged the aquifer with. So yield can't be determined, pump test or otherwise. Static level cannot be determined if you haven't developed the well. Additionally, an undeveloped well will have long-term maintenance problems. It won't last as long. It will fail sooner, almost certainly. And it'll produce way less water. When a well is properly developed, it produces more water. You can actually determine how much it produces. It will have lower maintenance cost, and it will last a lot longer. This is a big investment, and development is a critical part of this investment. But if all those other steps weren't followed appropriate for the aquifer, then development may or may not be effective. So they could spend hours and hours developing a well that may not help because they didn't do the things they needed to do to prepare that well for development. Because all those other steps, those planning steps and those finishing steps are all done so that when development can be started or is started, it's effective on the aquifer, and it makes that aquifer the best aquifer it could be for your particular situation, whether it's 1 gallon a minute or 1,000 gallons a minute. It's irrelevant. You can't get the max production from the aquifer without proper design and proper development. And then last and final step, we're over time. Wow, I talk a lot. So the last and final step to the drilling process, the basic steps, there's other little nuanced things, but the basic steps is a pump test. You know what? I'm going to put a pin in it. I'm going to come back to the pump test next week. We'll talk in detail about that, why it's important. Again, if you'd like access to the existing information, it looks like I have somebody, it says the Rebecca Miller. She says, I have friends who live on a short cliff above the ocean along Northern California coast. Their well produces salty water. Can AquaLocate help with such problems? Too deep, no fresh water. So yes, we can help. The good news is our technology doesn't see salt water very well unless it's a very low amount of salt, like something that's technically safe to drink. We probably could image it even if it was a little bit salty. But if it's too high in salt, we can't image it. So that's a good thing. It's hard to say if there's more than one aquifer there. A lot of coastal areas have what they call saltwater intrusion, where actually sometimes the ocean will be, the aquifer be pumped on so hard that it'll actually, the saltwater could intrude into the aquifer system. Although my guess is if they're in Northern California, they probably drilled too deep and just got into a poor quality aquifer. I'd be happy to do the research on that for Rebecca. If they want to send me information about their property, the research is free. I can find out what we can learn through the history of drilling in that area. But yes, the technology provided by AquaLocate can help. obviously we can help you determine if you have what you have. And if the only water there is salt water and you don't have any other access to water, then you're going to have to manage that resource and filter it using reverse osmosis or things like that. But if there is fresh water, we can help you find it. So thanks for the question. I really appreciate it. Again, anybody else, if you'd like to send us questions, feel free to do so. Rebecca, send us some more information, or have your friends send us information. We'd love to talk to them. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today, this Tuesday, July 21st, 2026. Man, the year is going by fast. We'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget to send us your questions. We'd love to talk to you. Also, like and share the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We would love to have more subscribers so we could share it with more people. The more people to watch, the more people we can get to see this really valuable information. All right, take care. Have a great night. See you next week.